The rain had been falling for 3 days straight in Millbrook, Oregon, turning the small coastal town into a grey watercolor painting where buildings blurred into sky and the ocean merged with the clouds on the horizon. It was the kind of weather that kept people indoors, huddled around fireplaces with cups of coffee, speaking in hushed voices about things they didn't fully understand. At the edge of town, past the abandoned lumber mill and the rusted train tracks that hadn't seen a locomotive in 20 years, there stood a cabin. It was small, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, surrounded by Douglas firs that had grown so tall they blocked out what little light managed to pierce through the perpetual overcast. The cabin had been empty for as long as anyone could remember, a forgotten relic of a logging boom that had come and gone like a fever dream. But 3 months ago, someone had moved in. His name was Marcus Cole, though nobody in town knew that yet. They only knew him as the stranger, the shadow that moved through the aisles of Patterson's general store once a week, never making eye contact, never speaking more than necessary. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed too broad for doorways and hands that looked like they could crush stone. His face was a road map of violence, a thick scar running from his left temple down to his jaw, another smaller one bisecting his right eyebrow. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they held something in their depths that made people look away, made them cross to the other side of the street when they saw him coming. The whispers had started almost immediately. Helen Patterson, who had owned the general store for 42 years and had seen every kind of person pass through Millbrook, was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. She stood behind her counter, watching through the rain-streaked window as the stranger loaded supplies into an old pickup truck that looked like it had survived a war. "There's something wrong with that man," she said to her husband Earl, who was restocking canned goods on the far shelf. "Something broken inside him. You can see it in the way he moves, like he's always expecting someone to attack him." Earl grunted, not looking up from his work. "Probably just wants to be left alone. Lots of folks come to places like this for that." "No." Helen shook her head, her grey curls bouncing with the motion. "I've seen people who want to be left alone. This is different. This man, he's running from something, or running from himself." She wasn't wrong. Marcus Cole had been a Navy SEAL for 15 years, one of the best operators in the history of the program. He had served in places whose names were still classified, had done things that would never appear in any official record. He had been a ghost, a weapon that the government pointed at problems that couldn't be solved through diplomacy or conventional means, and he had been good at it, too good. The mission that broke him happened in a village in Afghanistan, whose name he could no longer say out loud. It was supposed to be a simple extraction, getting a high-value asset out before the Taliban could get to him first. But nothing in that country was ever simple, and by the time the sun rose the next morning, Marcus had lost 4 members of his team and had been forced to make a choice that still woke him up screaming in the middle of the night. The official reports called it a success. The asset was extracted. The mission was completed. But Marcus knew the truth. He knew what he had done, what he had been forced to do, and no amount of medals or commendations could wash the blood off his hands. He had tried to go back to normal life. He had tried the VA, tried the therapy, tried the medications that were supposed to quiet the voices in his head. Nothing worked. The nightmares kept coming, vivid and relentless, pulling him back to that village night after night. He started drinking to sleep, then drinking to stay awake, then drinking just to feel something other than the numbness that had settled into his bones like a permanent winter. His wife left first, then his friends, then his family. One by one, everyone who had ever cared about him looked into his eyes and saw something that scared them, something that made them understand that the man they had known was gone, replaced by something darker, something dangerous. So Marcus ran. He sold everything he owned, bought the cheapest truck he could find, and drove until the roads ran out. He ended up in Millbrook because there was nowhere else to go, because the town was so small and so forgotten that he thought maybe, just maybe, the ghosts wouldn't be able to find him here. He was wrong about that too. The ghosts followed him everywhere. They sat in the corner of the cabin at night, watching him with accusing eyes. They whispered to him when he tried to sleep, reminding him of every mistake, every failure, every life he had taken. They were his constant companions, more faithful than any friend, more persistent than any enemy. On this particular rainy morning, Marcus sat at the small wooden table in his cabin, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. He hadn't slept in 3 days, couldn't sleep, not with the anniversary coming up. Tomorrow would be 5 years since the village, 5 years since everything changed, and his mind was already there, already replaying every moment in excruciating detail. His hands were shaking. They always shook now, a constant tremor that made simple tasks feel impossible. He looked down at them, at the calluses and the scars, and wondered for the 1,000th time why he was still here, still breathing, still taking up space in a world that had no use for men like him. The knock on the door made him jump so violently that he knocked the coffee cup off the table. It shattered on the floor, brown liquid spreading across the worn wooden boards, but Marcus barely noticed. His hand was already reaching for the hunting knife he kept strapped to his thigh, his body falling into a combat stance that was as natural as breathing. "Hello," a woman's voice, muffled by the rain and the thick wooden door. "Is anyone home?" Marcus didn't move, didn't breathe. His mind was racing through threat assessments, calculating angles of attack, identifying potential exits. The door was solid oak, 3 inches thick. It would take considerable force to breach. The windows were reinforced, wouldn't break easily. He had 2 minutes, maybe 3, before anyone could get inside. "Please," the voice came again, more desperate now. "I need help. My daughter. She's hurt." Something in those words cut through the fog in Marcus's brain. A daughter. Hurt. He thought of the children in the village, the ones he had tried to save, the ones he couldn't. Before he could stop himself, before he could think about what he was doing, he was moving toward the door. He opened it just a crack, enough to see but not enough to be vulnerable. Standing on his porch was a woman in her mid-30s, soaking wet, her dark hair plastered to her face. She was holding something in her arms, a small bundle wrapped in a pink rain jacket. "Please," she said again, her eyes wild with fear. "There was an accident. My car went off the road about a mile back. I tried to call for help, but there's no signal out here. Your cabin was the closest thing I could find." Marcus looked at the bundle in her arms. A face emerged from the pink jacket, a little girl no more than 6 or 7 years old. Her eyes were closed, and there was blood on her forehead, a gash that was still seeping red. "She hit her head on the dashboard," the woman explained, her voice cracking. "She was conscious for a while, but then she stopped responding. I don't know what to do. I don't know—" She broke down then, tears mixing with the rain on her face. Marcus stood there, frozen, every instinct telling him to close the door, to retreat back into his isolation, to stay away from these people and their problems. But the little girl's face kept pulling at something inside him, something he thought had died a long time ago. "Come inside," he heard himself say. "Quickly." The woman didn't hesitate. She pushed past him into the cabin, immediately looking for somewhere to lay her daughter down. Marcus cleared the small bed in the corner with one sweep of his arm, sending blankets and pillows flying. "Put her here," gently. He watched as the woman laid the child on the bed, watched her hands shake as she brushed wet hair away from the wound on the girl's forehead. The cut wasn't as bad as it had looked in the rain, maybe an inch long, shallow enough that it wouldn't need stitches, but the fact that the girl was unconscious was concerning. "What's her name?" Marcus asked, his voice rough from disuse. "Lily." The woman looked up at him, and he saw something flicker in her eyes, a moment of fear as she took in his scarred face, his massive frame, the knife still strapped to his thigh. But then her gaze shifted back to her daughter, and the fear was replaced by something else, something stronger. "Her name is Lily, and I'm Sarah, Sarah Mitchell." Marcus nodded, then knelt beside the bed. He reached out with hands that were still trembling, but his touch was gentle as he examined the wound. The bleeding had mostly stopped. The girl's pupils were reactive, equal in size. Her pulse was steady, her breathing normal. "She's probably got a concussion," he said. "The fact that she lost consciousness means we need to monitor her carefully. Does she have any allergies, any medical conditions I should know about?" Sarah shook her head. "No, nothing. She's always been healthy. Is she going to be okay?" "I think so, but she needs to be watched. If she doesn't wake up in the next hour, or if she starts vomiting, or if her pupils become uneven, we need to get her to a hospital. The nearest hospital is 40 miles away. And my car, I have a truck. If we need to go, we'll go." Sarah stared at him, and Marcus could see the questions forming in her mind. Who was this man? Why did he live out here alone? Why did he have so many scars? But she didn't ask any of them. She just nodded, gratitude replacing the uncertainty in her expression. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here." Marcus didn't respond. He couldn't. The words were stuck somewhere in his throat, trapped behind years of silence and isolation. Instead, he stood up and moved to the small kitchen area, filling a pot with water and setting it on the wood-burning stove. "I'll make some tea. You should get out of those wet clothes before you get hypothermia. There are some blankets in the chest by the window." Sarah hesitated for a moment, then did as he suggested. She found a thick wool blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders, pulling a chair close to the bed so she could watch her daughter. The cabin fell into silence, broken only by the sound of rain on the roof and the crackling of the fire in the stove. 20 minutes later, Lily opened her eyes. "Mommy!" Sarah was at her side in an instant, tears streaming down her face. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here. My head hurts. I know, sweetheart, you bumped it in the car, but you're going to be okay. You're going to be just fine." Lily's eyes wandered around the cabin, taking in her unfamiliar surroundings. When they landed on Marcus, standing in the shadows by the stove, she didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She just stared at him with the unfiltered curiosity that only children possess. "Who's that?" she asked. "That's—" Sarah hesitated, realizing she didn't know his name. "Marcus," he said, the word coming out like it hurt. "My name is Marcus." Lily continued to stare at him. "You have a hurt on your face." "Lily!" Sarah's voice was sharp with embarrassment. "That's not polite." But Marcus just nodded. "I do. I got it a long time ago." "Did it hurt?" "Yes." "Does it still hurt?" The question caught him off guard. He thought about lying, about giving her the easy answer that would make everyone comfortable, but something in those innocent eyes made him tell the truth. Sometimes. Not the way it used to. Lily considered this for a moment. Then she smiled. A bright, genuine smile that seemed to light up the dark cabin. "My friend Emma broke her arm once, and she said it hurt really bad at first, but then it stopped hurting. She said that's how bones work. Maybe your hurt will work the same way." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, a fissure in the wall he had built around himself. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. He just turned back to the stove and poured 2 cups of tea, bringing one to Sarah and keeping one for himself. The rain continued to fall. By evening, it became clear that Sarah and Lily wouldn't be going anywhere. The road back to town had flooded, and Marcus's truck, while capable, wasn't equipped to handle the rushing water that had turned the dirt track into a river. They would have to wait until morning, hope that the rain stopped and the water receded. Sarah apologized profusely for the imposition, but Marcus waved her off. He wasn't sure why he was allowing these strangers to stay in his space, wasn't sure why he hadn't already retreated into the silence that had become his refuge. But there was something about them, something about the way Lily looked at him without fear, that made him want to stay present, to be here in this moment instead of lost in the memories of the past. He cooked dinner for them, a simple meal of canned soup and bread that he had bought from Patterson's the week before. Sarah helped where she could, navigating around him in the small kitchen with an ease that suggested she was used to tight spaces. Lily sat at the table, her head bandaged with a clean strip of cloth, chattering away about her school, her friends, her pet rabbit named Mr. Whiskers, who was staying with a neighbor while they were on their trip. "We're going to see my grandma," she explained to Marcus, who was standing at the stove stirring the soup. "She lives in a big house by the ocean, and she has a garden with tomatoes and cucumbers, and sometimes we make salad together." "That sounds nice," Marcus said, surprising himself with how natural the words felt. "Do you have a grandma?" "I did. She passed away a long time ago." "That's sad." Lily's face fell for a moment, then brightened again. "But maybe she's in heaven now, and she can see you from there. My grandpa is in heaven. Mummy says he watches over us." Sarah gave Marcus an apologetic look, but he shook his head slightly. It was fine, more than fine. There was something cleansing about Lily's honesty, her willingness to talk about hard things without flinching. After dinner, Marcus let Sarah have the bed with Lily, insisting that he would sleep in the chair by the fire. Sleep was unlikely anyway, especially tonight, with the anniversary weighing on him like a physical burden. He sat in the darkness, listening to the rain, watching the shadows dance on the walls. At some point, he must have dozed off, because the next thing he knew, there was a small hand on his arm. "Marcus!" He jolted awake, his hand reaching for the knife before his brain could catch up. When he realized it was Lily standing beside him, her eyes wide in the firelight, he forced himself to relax, to unclench his fist. "You were making noises," she said softly. "Scary noises. Were you having a bad dream?" Marcus's heart was pounding, the images from the nightmare still flickering at the edges of his vision. The village, the fire, the children screaming. He closed his eyes, trying to push it all back into the box where he kept it, but it wouldn't go. It never went. "Yes," he admitted, "I was having a bad dream." Lily climbed up onto the arm of the chair, settling herself next to him with a comfort that should have been impossible given the circumstances. She was warm against his side, a small anchor in the storm of his memories. "I have bad dreams sometimes too," she said. "Mommy says that when you have a bad dream, you should think about something happy instead, like ice cream, or puppies, or rainbows. Does that work?" "Sometimes." She yawned, rubbing her eyes. "What makes you happy, Marcus?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. Happy. When was the last time he had felt happy? He couldn't remember what it felt like to wake up without dread, to go through a day without the weight of the past crushing him. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I used to know, but I forgot." Lily considered this with the seriousness that only children can bring to such matters. Then she reached out and took his hand, her tiny fingers wrapping around his scarred, calloused palm. "Maybe you just need to practice," she said, "like when I was learning to ride my bike. I fell down a lot, but then I practiced and now I can ride really fast." Marcus looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between her smooth, unblemished skin and his own battered flesh. Something stirred in his chest, something that felt almost like hope. "Maybe you're right," he said. They sat like that for a long while, the fire crackling, the rain drumming on the roof. At some point, Lily fell asleep, her head resting against his arm. Marcus didn't move, didn't want to disturb her. He just sat there in the darkness, feeling the warmth of her small body, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. For the first time in 5 years, the ghosts were quiet. Morning came with the kind of soft golden light that only appears after a storm. The rain had stopped sometime in the night, and the world outside the cabin looked fresh, washed clean. Marcus woke to find himself still in the chair, his neck stiff, his back aching, but he didn't care. He had slept for more than 4 hours straight, the longest stretch of uninterrupted sleep he'd had in months. Lily was back in the bed with her mother, both of them still deep in dreamland. Marcus moved quietly around the cabin, starting a fire, putting coffee on to brew. He stepped outside onto the porch, breathing in the crisp morning air, feeling the sun on his face. The forest around the cabin was alive with birdsong, creatures emerging from their shelters now that the storm had passed. Everything seemed different somehow, brighter, more vivid. Marcus wondered if this was what normal people felt like every morning, this sense of possibility, of renewal. "Good morning." He turned to find Sarah standing in the doorway, the wool blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. She looked better than she had the night before, some color returning to her cheeks. "Morning," he replied. "Coffee's almost ready." She came to stand beside him on the porch, looking out at the forest. "It's beautiful here, so peaceful. That's why I came. For the peace." Sarah glanced at him, and he could see the question still lurking in her eyes. But this time she asked one of them, "Were you in the military?" Marcus nodded. "Navy. 15 years. I thought so. My father was Army. He had the same look in his eyes that you do, like he'd seen things that couldn't be unseen." Marcus said nothing. There was nothing to say. "He struggled when he came back," Sarah continued. "Struggled for a long time. We almost lost him a few times, but eventually he found his way through. It took years, but he found it." "How?" The question came out before he could stop it, raw and desperate. Sarah turned to face him fully, her expression soft with understanding. "Connection," she said. He realized that he couldn't do it alone, that trying to carry all that weight by himself was going to kill him. So he started reaching out, started letting people in, started accepting help even when every part of him was screaming that he didn't deserve it. "What if you don't? Deserve it, I mean." Sarah smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Everyone deserves it, Marcus. Everyone. No matter what you've done, no matter what you've seen, you deserve to have people who care about you. That's not something you earn. It's just something you accept." The coffee started to whistle inside the cabin, breaking the moment. Sarah went to get it, leaving Marcus alone with her words echoing in his head. An hour later, he drove Sarah and Lily back to their car. The water had receded enough to make the road passable, though barely. The car itself was worse off than Sarah had thought. The front end crumpled against a tree, one wheel bent at an impossible angle. It would need to be towed, repaired, a process that would take days at least. Marcus helped them gather their belongings from the wreck, loading everything into the bed of his truck. Then he drove them into Millbrook to Patterson's general store, where Helen could call a tow truck and arrange for someone to come look at the damage. The reaction in the store was immediate and pronounced. Helen's eyes went wide when she saw Marcus walk through the door, wider still when she noticed the woman and child with him. Conversation stopped. People stared. The atmosphere became charged with tension. "These folks had an accident on the road last night," Marcus said, his voice flat, giving nothing away. "They need a tow truck and a mechanic." Helen nodded slowly, reaching for the phone on the counter. "I'll call Mike at the garage. He can be here within the hour." "Thank you." Sarah stepped forward, smiling graciously. "And thank you for taking us in last night," she said to Marcus, loud enough for everyone in the store to hear. "I don't know what we would have done without you. You saved my daughter's life." The words hung in the air like a judgment. Marcus felt the weight of every eye in the store on him, felt the shift in the atmosphere as people reassessed what they thought they knew. "You're welcome," he mumbled, then turned and walked out. He was halfway to his truck when he heard running footsteps behind him. He turned to find Lily racing toward him, her arms outstretched. "Wait, you forgot to say goodbye." Before he could react, she had thrown her arms around his waist, hugging him with all the strength her small body could muster. Marcus stood there frozen, not knowing what to do. His arms hung at his sides, useless. "Thank you for letting us stay at your house," Lily said, her voice muffled against his stomach. "And thank you for telling me about your hurt. I hope it stops hurting someday." Marcus felt his throat tighten. Slowly, hesitantly, he brought his hands up and placed them on her back, returning the hug. "Thank you for the advice about practice," he said. "I'll try to remember it." Lily pulled back and grinned up at him. "You have to promise." "I promise." She held out her pinky finger, the universal symbol of unbreakable vows among children everywhere. Marcus stared at it for a moment, then awkwardly hooked his own pinky around hers. "Okay, now it's official," Lily declared. "You can't break a pinky promise. It's the rules." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, a fissure in the wall around his heart, and despite everything, he smiled. Sarah appeared behind her daughter, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. She put a hand on Lily's shoulder and looked at Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she said again, "for everything." Then they were gone, back into the store, leaving Marcus standing alone in the parking lot with the sun warming his face and something strange blooming in his chest. He drove back to the cabin, but he didn't go inside. Instead, he sat on the porch, looking out at the forest, thinking about everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. A mother and daughter had stumbled into his life, crashing through his isolation like a meteorite, leaving a crater in their wake. And now they were gone, and he was alone again. But something was different. The silence that had been his constant companion no longer felt like protection. It felt like a prison. The walls he had built around himself suddenly seemed less like safety and more like suffocation. And the ghosts, while still present, seemed further away, their voices muffled, their accusations less certain. Marcus thought about what Sarah had said about her father. Connection, reaching out, letting people in. It sounded impossible, terrifying even. How could he let anyone in when he was so broken, so damaged? How could he ask anyone to carry the weight of what he had done? But then he thought about Lily, about her fearless questions and her easy acceptance. She had looked at his scars and seen not a monster, but a man who was hurting. She had climbed into his chair in the middle of the night and offered him comfort without asking for anything in return. She had made him promise to practice being happy, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Maybe it could be. For the first time in 5 years, Marcus Cole considered the possibility that he might not be beyond saving. The next few weeks passed slowly, as weeks in small towns often do. Marcus continued his routine, such as it was, venturing into town once a week for supplies, avoiding eye contact, speaking only when necessary. But something had changed. The people of Millbrook no longer crossed the street when they saw him coming. They no longer whispered quite so loudly when he entered a store. Helen Patterson, in particular, seemed to have warmed to him. She started leaving small things for him at the counter, a fresh loaf of bread here, a jar of homemade jam there, always with a gruff, "Don't read too much into it," that fooled no one. And then there was Mike from the garage. Mike was a big man, almost as big as Marcus, with a bushy beard and tattoos running up both arms. He had served in the Marines 2 tours in Iraq and had the look in his eyes that Marcus recognized all too well. They had exchanged no more than a dozen words in the 3 months Marcus had been in Millbrook, but there was an understanding between them, a recognition of shared experience that didn't need to be spoken. One afternoon, about a month after the storm, Mike pulled up to Marcus's cabin in his tow truck. He didn't get out, just sat there with the engine idling, looking at the cabin like he was trying to decide something. Marcus stepped onto the porch, coffee cup in hand. "Something I can help you with?" Mike was silent for a moment. Then he killed the engine and climbed out of the truck. "There's a group that meets on Thursdays," he said. "Not preamble. No small talk. Veterans. We talk, mostly. Sometimes drink coffee. Sometimes just sit there and not talk. No pressure, no judgment." Marcus felt his defenses rise, the familiar urge to retreat, to hide. "I'm not much for groups." "Neither was I." Mike shrugged. "Still went, it helps, or it doesn't. Either way, at least you're not alone." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, holding it out to Marcus. "It's at the community center. 7 o'clock. Like I said, no pressure." Marcus took the paper, not sure why. Mike nodded once, then climbed back into his truck and drove away without another word. Thursday came and went. Marcus stayed in his cabin, the piece of paper sitting on the kitchen table like an accusation. The next Thursday was the same, and the next. But on the fourth Thursday, something happened. He woke up from a nightmare, the worst one yet, the one where the faces of the children in the village morphed into Lily's face, where her accusing eyes followed him through fire and smoke. He sat in the dark for hours, shaking, sweating, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him until he couldn't breathe. And then he thought about the pinky promise. He had promised to practice being happy. He had promised Lily, and you couldn't break a pinky promise. It was the rules. At 6:30 that evening, Marcus Cole got in his truck and drove to the community center. The building was old, a brick structure that had probably been a school or a church at some point in the town's history. There were a handful of cars in the parking lot, including Mike's tow truck. Marcus sat in his vehicle for 10 minutes, his hands gripping the steering wheel, every instinct screaming at him to leave. But he didn't leave. He got out of the truck, walked to the door, and went inside. The room was smaller than he expected, just a circle of folding chairs surrounding a coffee maker on a folding table. There were 7 men and 2 women, ranging in age from late 20s to early 70s. They all looked up when Marcus entered, and he saw recognition in some of their eyes, curiosity in others. Mike stood up and nodded toward an empty chair. "Marcus, glad you could make it." Marcus didn't respond. He just walked to the chair and sat down, his body rigid, his hands clasped in his lap. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was thick, heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of people who understood that sometimes there was nothing to say. Then an older man, maybe 60, with white hair and a face that had seen too much, cleared his throat. "I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone," he said, his voice rough. "Something that's been eating at me for 40 years. And he talked. He talked about Vietnam, about a mission gone wrong, about choices made in the heat of battle that had haunted him ever since. He talked about the drinking, the failed marriages, the years of isolation. He talked about the moment he had put a gun in his mouth, finger on the trigger, ready to end it all. "My granddaughter walked in," he said, his eyes distant. "She was 5 years old. She didn't scream, didn't run. She just looked at me and said, 'Grandpa, are you sad?' And I realized that if I pulled that trigger, she would carry that image for the rest of her life. She would grow up thinking that sadness was something you couldn't survive. So I put the gun down, and I haven't picked it up since." The room was silent when he finished. Marcus felt something wet on his cheeks and realized he was crying. He couldn't remember the last time he had cried. One by one, the others shared their stories. Not everyone spoke, but those who did laid bare their deepest wounds, their darkest moments. And as Marcus listened, he realized something profound. He wasn't alone. These people, these strangers, they understood. They knew what it was like to carry the weight of things that couldn't be undone. They knew what it was like to be broken, and they were still here. Still fighting, still trying. When the meeting ended, Mike walked him out to the parking lot. "Same time next week," he said. It wasn't a question. Marcus nodded. "Same time next week." He drove back to the cabin, but for the first time in 5 years the darkness didn't feel quite so suffocating. The ghosts were still there, whispering in the corners, but their voices seemed more distant now, less powerful. He thought about the old man and his granddaughter. He thought about Lily, about her fearless questions and her pinky promise. He thought about all the children he had failed to save, and for the first time he allowed himself to consider the possibility that saving himself might be a way of honoring them. That living, truly living, might be the bravest thing he could do. That night, Marcus Cole slept for 6 hours straight. When he woke up, the sun was streaming through the windows and the forest was alive with birdsong. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was the beginning of something, and that was enough. Months passed, the seasons changed. The endless rain of autumn gave way to the bitter cold of winter, which eventually surrendered to the tentative warmth of spring. Throughout it all, Marcus kept going to the Thursday meetings. He didn't always talk, but he listened. He learned. He began to understand that healing wasn't a destination, but a journey, one that had no end, only progress. He started venturing into town more often. He helped Helen Patterson fix a leak in her roof. He assisted Mike at the garage when there was more work than one man could handle. He even started attending church on Sundays, not because he believed, but because it was another place where people gathered, another opportunity to practice the art of connection. The people of Millbrook noticed the change. They still whispered, but now the whispers were different. Instead of warning each other about the dangerous stranger in the cabin, they talked about the quiet man who had helped Sarah Mitchell and her daughter, the veteran who was finally coming out of his shell. One afternoon in late April, Marcus was working in his small garden, a project he had started as a way to occupy his hands and quiet his mind. He heard a car approaching on the dirt road, an unusual occurrence given how far off the main highway he lived. He stood up, wiping soil from his hands, watching as a familiar sedan pulled up in front of the cabin. Sarah Mitchell stepped out of the driver's side, a nervous smile on her face. "Surprise!" she said. Before Marcus could respond, the back door flew open and Lily came running toward him, her arms already outstretched for a hug. "Marcus, we came back. I told Mommy we had to come see you, and she said yes, and we drove for 3 whole days, and I have so much to tell you." She crashed into him with the force of a small hurricane, wrapping her arms around his waist and squeezing with all her might. Marcus found himself hugging her back, a reflex that no longer felt foreign. "What are you doing here?" he asked, looking over Lily's head at Sarah. "We were on our way to see my mother again," Sarah explained, walking toward him. "Lily insisted we make a detour. She's been talking about you non-stop ever since we left. I think you made quite an impression." Lily pulled back and grinned up at him. "I drew you pictures. Mommy, where are the pictures?" Sarah laughed and went back to the car, retrieving a folder stuffed with crayon drawings. Lily snatched it from her hands and presented it to Marcus with great ceremony. "This one is you and me and Mommy in the cabin during the storm, and this one is you with no more hurts on your face because they all healed. And this one is a rainbow, because rainbows are happy and you promised to practice being happy." Marcus looked at the drawings, at the crude but heartfelt depictions of their time together, and felt something swell in his chest. It was joy, he realized. Pure, uncomplicated joy. He had almost forgotten what it felt like. "They're beautiful," he said, his voice thick. "Thank you." "Are you practicing?" Lily asked, her face suddenly serious. "You promised." Marcus knelt down so he was at her eye level. "I'm practicing every day, and you know what? It's getting easier." Lily's face split into a grin. "I knew it would. I told you you'd just have to practice like with riding a bike." You were right. Sarah invited Marcus to join them for dinner that evening, a meal at the small diner in town that served the best burgers in the county. He hesitated, the old instincts rising up, but one look at Lily's hopeful face made the decision for him. Let me get cleaned up. I'll meet you there in an hour. The diner was busy when Marcus arrived, most of the tables occupied by locals who knew each other by name. Conversations paused when he walked in, but only briefly. Helen Patterson waved from her booth. Mike gave him a nod from the counter. The teenage waitress, Emma, smiled and led him to where Sarah and Lily were already seated. "This is like a real family dinner," Lily announced happily as Marcus slid into the booth across from her. "We never have family dinners because it's just me and Mommy." Sarah shot Marcus an apologetic look. "Lily, honey." "It's fine," Marcus said. "She's right. This is nice." And it was. They ordered burgers and milkshakes, and Lily talked enough for all three of them, filling every silence with stories and questions and observations. Marcus found himself laughing at her antics, genuinely laughing, a sound so foreign it startled him. At one point, Lily excused herself to go look at the jukebox in the corner, leaving Marcus and Sarah alone. "Thank you for letting us barge in on you like this," Sarah said. "I know you value your privacy." "I used to." Marcus watched Lily as she punched buttons on the old machine, bouncing on her heels with excitement. "I'm starting to realize that maybe I valued it too much." "How are you doing, really?" He considered the question carefully. "Better. Not good, but better. I go to a group now, other veterans. We talk. It helps." Sarah's face lit up. "That's wonderful, Marcus. My father always said that the group he found saved his life. Maybe that's what this one's doing for me." He paused, then added, "Your daughter helped too. That night she climbed into my chair and held my hand. I hadn't felt human in a long time. She made me feel human again." Sarah reached across the table and put her hand on his. "She has a gift for that. She sees the best in people, even when they can't see it in themselves." The jukebox crackled to life, an old country song filling the diner. Lily came running back to the table, breathless with excitement. "Mommy, can we dance? Please, please, please." Sarah laughed. "Honey, there's no dance floor. There's room by the jukebox. Please?" Before Sarah could answer, Lily turned to Marcus with those big, pleading eyes. "Will you dance with us, Marcus?" Every eye in the diner was on them now. Marcus felt the familiar panic rising, the urge to flee, to hide. But then he looked at Lily's face, at the hope shining there, and he remembered the pinky promise. Practice being happy. "Sure," he said, sliding out of the booth. "But I should warn you, I'm not a very good dancer." Lily grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the jukebox. "That's okay. Neither am I. We can practice together." Sarah joined them, and for the next few minutes, the three of them swayed awkwardly to the music, bumping into each other, laughing at their own clumsiness. The other diners watched with amusement, and, Marcus noticed, something like approval. When the song ended, there was a smattering of applause. Marcus felt his face flush, but he didn't run. He just stood there, holding Lily's hand, feeling something crack open inside him. Something that had been closed for a very long time. They walked back to the table together, and Lily snuggled into the booth beside him instead of across from him. She rested her head against his arm, tired from all the excitement. "When can we come visit again?" she asked sleepily. Marcus looked at Sarah, a question in his eyes. "We could come back in the summer," Sarah said slowly. "If that's okay with you." "I'd like that." Lily beamed. "Can we have another dance party?" "Sure, kid. Whatever you want." She yawned and closed her eyes, her small body warm against his side. Marcus sat there, not moving, afraid to disturb her. He looked around the diner, at the people who had once feared him, who now nodded at him like he was one of them. He thought about everything he had been through, everything he had lost, everything he had done, and he realized that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for him. Not to undo the past, but to build something new from its ashes. Not to forget the ghosts, but to learn to live with them, It wasn't redemption exactly. It was something smaller, more fragile. It was hope. Summer arrived in Millbrook like a gift. Warm sunshine chasing away the last remnants of spring rain. The forest around Marcus's cabin exploded with life, wildflowers carpeting the meadows, birds singing from every branch. For the first time in years, Marcus noticed these things. He stopped to watch a deer and her fawn drink from the creek behind his property. He sat on his porch at dawn, coffee in hand, listening to the world wake up. The group continued to meet every Thursday. Marcus had started talking more, sharing fragments of his story with the others. It was still hard, still felt like pulling pieces of himself apart. But each time he spoke, the weight on his chest got a little lighter. He had also started volunteering at the community centre, helping with maintenance and repairs. It wasn't much, just a way to keep busy, but it gave him a purpose, a reason to get up in the morning beyond simple survival. In June, Sarah called to say they were coming for their promised visit. Marcus spent the week before their arrival, cleaning the cabin, stocking up on supplies, even buying a small inflatable pool for Lily to splash around in. He felt ridiculous, like a child preparing for Christmas, but he couldn't help himself. The anticipation was a new sensation, one he had almost forgotten. They arrived on a Saturday afternoon, the car pulling up in a cloud of dust, Lily's face pressed against the window, waving frantically. "Marcus! Marcus! We're here!" She was out of the car before it had fully stopped, running toward him with abandon. He caught her mid-leap, swinging her up into his arms like she weighed nothing at all. "I missed you," she declared, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Did you miss me?" "Every day," he said, and meant it. The week that followed was unlike anything Marcus had experienced since coming to Millbrook. Lily was a force of nature, constantly moving, constantly asking questions, constantly pulling him out of his shell. She dragged him on hikes through the forest, insisted on fishing in the creek even though she refused to touch the worms, demanded bedtime stories that he had to make up on the spot. "Tell me the one about the brave knight again," she would say, snuggled under the blankets, eyes heavy with sleep, and Marcus would tell her, spinning tales of heroism and adventure, of knights who faced their darkest fears and emerged stronger. He never told her that the knight was him, that the dragon he was fighting was inside his own head, but somehow he thought she knew. Sarah watched it all with a quiet smile, occasionally catching his eye and nodding as if to say, "You're doing great. Keep going." She had become something like a friend over the past months, exchanging occasional phone calls and emails, checking in on his progress. But it was Lily who had truly burrowed into his heart, Lily who had cracked open the walls he had built and let in the light. On their last night together, the three of them sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Lily was between them, her head resting on Marcus's shoulder, her hand in Sarah's. "I don't want to go," she said quietly. "I know, sweetheart," Sarah replied. "But we'll come back. We always come back." Lily turned to look up at Marcus. "Promise you'll be here when we come back?" "I promise." "Pinky promise?" He held out his pinky, and she wrapped hers around it with a satisfied nod. "Good. Because you're my best friend now, and best friends always have to be there for each other." Marcus felt his throat tighten. Best friend. When was the last time anyone had called him that? When was the last time he had deserved it? "I'll be here," he said. "I'll always be here." They left the next morning, Lily crying as the car pulled away, waving from the back window until they disappeared around the bend in the road. Marcus stood there long after they were gone, feeling the absence like a physical pain. But it wasn't the bad kind of pain. It was the pain of having something to lose, something worth fighting for. It was the pain of being alive. He went back inside the cabin to the silence that had once felt like safety and now felt like loneliness. But it wouldn't be forever. Summer would end, and autumn would come, and winter after that. And then spring and another summer, and Sarah and Lily would return. He had something to look forward to now. That was new. The phone rang that afternoon, startling him. He had given his number to Sarah, but rarely received calls. "Hello? Marcus, it's Mike. We've got a situation. Can you come to town?" The situation, as Mike put it, turned out to be a young man named Danny, who had just returned from his third deployment in Afghanistan. He was 23 years old, barely old enough to drink, but his eyes held the same haunted look that Marcus saw in the mirror every morning. Danny had shown up at Mike's garage that morning, looking for work. He had no experience with mechanics, no skills that Mike could use, but something about the kid's desperation had struck a chord. Mike had given him some odd jobs to do, sweeping the floors, organizing tools, anything to keep him busy. But then Danny had broken down, collapsing in the middle of the garage, sobbing like his heart was being torn apart. When Marcus arrived, Danny was sitting on an overturned bucket in the corner, arms wrapped around himself, rocking back and forth. Mike stood nearby, looking helpless. "I didn't know who else to call," Mike said quietly. "He won't talk to me, won't talk to anyone. But I thought maybe—" Marcus nodded and walked toward the young man, crouching down so they were at eye level. "Danny, my name's Marcus. I was a SEAL. Did 3 tours before I got out." Danny looked up, eyes red and swollen. "I can't do this anymore. I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see them, I hear them. I can't make it stop." "I know." Marcus's voice was steady, calm. "I know exactly what that feels like. And I'm not going to lie to you, it doesn't just go away. But it can get better, with time, with help. I don't deserve help." Danny's voice cracked. "You don't know what I did, what I had to do. You're right. I don't know what you did, but I know what I did. And I spent 5 years convinced that I didn't deserve to be alive, that I was too broken, too damaged, too far gone. I pushed everyone away. I hid from the world, and all it did was make everything worse." Danny was listening now, really listening. "There's a group that meets on Thursdays," Marcus continued. "Veterans, like us, we talk about the things we can't talk about anywhere else. And we don't judge each other. We can't. We've all been there. What if they hate me? What if they think I'm a monster?" Marcus thought about Lily, about her fearless acceptance, her simple belief that even the most broken things could be healed. They won't. And even if they did, it wouldn't matter. Because you don't go to the group for them. You go for yourself. You go because staying silent is killing you and talking might not save you, but at least it gives you a chance. Danny was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Thursday? Thursday, 7 o'clock. I'll pick you up if you want." "Okay." It was barely a whisper, but it was enough. Marcus stood up and extended his hand. Danny took it, his grip weak but present. "One day at a time," Marcus said. "That's how we do this. One day at a time." That Thursday, Marcus drove Danny to the community center. They sat through the meeting together, and when it was Danny's turn to speak, he talked for 45 minutes straight. He cried. He raged. He confessed things that made even the hardest men in the room look away. And when he was done, they welcomed him like a brother. On the drive back, Danny was quiet. Marcus let the silence sit, knowing that sometimes words weren't necessary. Finally, as they pulled up to the small apartment Danny was renting, the young man spoke. "Thank you. I don't know why you helped me, but thank you." Marcus thought about Lily, about her pinky promise, about the practice of being happy. "Someone helped me once," he said. "A little girl who wasn't afraid of my scars. She taught me that healing isn't something you do alone. It's something you do together." Danny nodded slowly. Will you come next week? To the meeting?" "Every week. For as long as you need." Danny got out of the truck, then turned back. "That little girl, is she someone special?" Marcus smiled, a real smile, one that reached his eyes. Yeah, she is. He drove home through the darkening forest, the headlights cutting through the trees, the radio playing softly. The ghosts were still there, always would be, but they no longer controlled him. They were passengers now, not drivers. He thought about how far he had come, from that first night in the cabin alone and broken, to now. He thought about Sarah and Lily, about Mike and Danny, about the group and the town and all the connections he had forged. He thought about the old man and his granddaughter, about the moment a child's innocent question had saved a life. Maybe that's what it was all about, he realized. Not grand gestures or heroic acts, but small moments of connection. A little girl who wasn't afraid. A helping hand when you needed it most. A group of strangers who understood your pain because they carried the same burden. Maybe that's what saved people. Not miracles or magic, but simple human kindness. The cabin came into view, dark against the darkening sky. Marcus parked the truck and sat there for a moment, looking at his home, at the life he had built from the wreckage of his past. It wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was his, and it was worth fighting for. He got out of the truck and walked inside, turning on the lights, chasing away the shadows. The drawings Lily had made were tacked to the wall above his bed, bright splashes of color in an otherwise plain room. He looked at them every night before he slept, a reminder of why he was still here. That night, he dreamed of the village again. But this time, when he saw the children's faces, they weren't accusing. They were peaceful. And when he woke up, the sun was streaming through the windows, and the birds were singing, and for the first time in a long time, Marcus Cole felt grateful to be alive. The years that followed were not easy. Recovery never is. There were setbacks and stumbles, nights when the darkness threatened to swallow him whole, days when getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain. But Marcus had learned to reach out when he needed help, to accept the hands that were offered, to trust that he wasn't alone. Sarah and Lily became a permanent fixture in his life. They visited every summer and every Christmas, and in between there were phone calls and video chats and care packages filled with drawings and letters. Lily grew from a precocious 7-year-old into a thoughtful teenager, and through it all, her faith in Marcus never wavered. "You're my hero," she told him on her 16th birthday during a video call that Sarah had set up, "not because you were a soldier, but because you didn't give up. Even when it would have been easier to give up, you kept fighting." Marcus had to look away from the screen, overcome with emotion. "You saved me," he said when he could speak again. "That night in the cabin, when you held my hand, you saved me." "We saved each other," Lily replied. "That's how it works." She was right, of course. She usually was. The group continued to meet every Thursday, and Marcus had become one of its leaders, helping newcomers find their footing, sharing his story so others would know they weren't alone. Danny had become his closest friend, a partner in the work of helping other veterans navigate the long road back from war. Together, they had started a mentorship program, pairing struggling veterans with those who had made progress, creating a network of support that extended far beyond the walls of the community center. The town of Millbrook had embraced Marcus completely. He was no longer the scary stranger in the cabin, but a valued member of the community, someone people turned to when they needed a helping hand or a listening ear. Helen Patterson had become something like a surrogate grandmother, always fussing over him, making sure he ate properly, scolding him when he worked too hard. "You need to take care of yourself," she would say, wagging her finger at him. "Can't help others if you run yourself into the ground." She was right, too. Self-care had become an important part of his routine, something he had resisted at first, but had come to appreciate. Exercise, proper sleep, time in nature, creative outlets. The things that seemed so simple but made such a difference. On the 10th anniversary of the night Sarah and Lily had stumbled into his life, Marcus organized a reunion. He invited everyone who had been part of his journey, the Thursday group, the town folk who had given him a chance, Sarah and Lily and Sarah's mother, who had become another surrogate family member. They gathered at the cabin, which had been expanded over the years, a new addition here, a porch there, until it was less of a hermit's hideaway and more of a proper home. There was food and music and laughter, the sound of children playing in the yard, the murmur of adults catching up on each other's lives. Marcus stood on the porch, watching it all, feeling a strange mixture of disbelief and gratitude. This was his life now, this joy, this connection, this belonging. It seemed impossible, like something from a dream. "What are you thinking about?" He turned to find Lily standing beside him, a young woman now, tall and graceful, with the same bright eyes that had looked at him so fearlessly 10 years ago. "Just remembering," he said, "that first night. How scared I was. You didn't seem scared. I was terrified. Of you, of your mother, of what it might mean if I let myself care about anything again." Lily leaned against the porch railing, looking out at the gathered crowd. "And now I can't imagine my life without all of this, without you." She smiled, that same bright smile that had broken through his defenses all those years ago. "I'm glad you kept your promise," she said, "the pinky promise, to practice being happy." Marcus reached out and took her hand, not pinky to pinky this time, but hand to hand, a connection between equals. "Best promise I ever made." They stood there together, watching the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The ghosts were still there, would always be there, but they had faded to whispers, memories of a past that no longer defined him. He thought about the man he had been 10 years ago, broken and alone, convinced that he was beyond saving. He thought about the little girl who had seen past his scars, who had refused to be afraid, who had taught him that healing was possible if you were willing to do the work. And he thought about all the people who had helped him along the way, the hands that had reached out when he needed them most, the voices that had reminded him he wasn't alone. It had taken a village to save him. But then again, that's how it always worked. Nobody survived alone. Nobody was meant to. "Hey, Marcus!" Danny called from the yard. "Get down here! We're about to do the toast!" Marcus squeezed Lily's hand one more time, then released it. "Coming!" He walked down the steps into the crowd of people who had become his family, who had seen him at his worst and loved him anyway. They raised their glasses, and Mike, who had been chosen to give the toast, cleared his throat. "To Marcus," he said, "who taught us that it's never too late to start over, that the darkest nights lead to the brightest mornings, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone help you." "To Marcus!" the crowd echoed. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face, but he didn't try to hide them. He had learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was strength. It was the willingness to be seen, truly seen, in all your brokenness and all your beauty. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "All of you, for not giving up on me." Sarah raised her glass again. "We never would. That's what family does." Family. The word settled into his chest like a warm light. He looked around at the faces surrounding him, at the life he had built from the ashes of his past, and he felt something he had thought was lost forever. Peace. The party went on long into the night. Stories shared, memories made, connections strengthened. And when the last guest had gone, and the cabin was quiet again, Marcus sat on his porch one more time, looking up at the stars. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the pain and the struggle, the moments of despair and the moments of grace. He thought about the little girl who had refused to be afraid, who had seen the good in him when he couldn't see it in himself. And he smiled. It wasn't the end of the story. There would be more challenges ahead, more dark nights to navigate. That was the nature of life, especially for people who carried the kind of weight he carried. But he was ready now, ready to face whatever came, not alone, but surrounded by people who cared about him. The war-broken ex-Navy SEAL that everyone had feared had found his way home. Not to a place, but to a people. Not to a destination, but to a journey. And it had all started with one little girl who did the unthinkable. She wasn't afraid. 20 years had passed since that stormy night when Sarah and Lily Mitchell had crashed into Marcus Cole's life, quite literally. The cabin at the edge of Millbrook had undergone so many renovations over the years that it was barely recognizable as the hermit's hideaway it had once been. A wraparound porch now circled the entire structure, with rocking chairs positioned to catch the morning sun. A second story had been added, along with a proper garage for Marcus's collection of tools and projects. The garden that had started as a small patch of vegetables had expanded into a sprawling landscape of flowers, fruit trees, and a small pond where koi fish swam in lazy circles. Marcus stood on that porch now, his hair grey at the temples, his body still strong despite the years, watching as a familiar car made its way up the winding drive. His heart lifted the way it always did when they visited, though visits had become less frequent as life had grown more complicated. Lily was 30 years old now, a doctor at a VA hospital in Portland, specializing in treating veterans with PTSD. She had gone into the field, she often said, because of him, because watching his journey had shown her that healing was possible, that broken people could be put back together if someone cared enough to try. She was married now, to a man named James, who had served in the Coast Guard and understood the unique challenges that came with loving someone connected to the military world. They had 2 children, twins named Sophie and Michael, who called Marcus Grandpa Bear because of his size and his habit of giving bone-crushing hugs. The car pulled up, and the doors flew open. 2 small figures came barreling out, racing toward the porch with the unbridled energy that only children possessed. "Grandpa Bear! Grandpa Bear!" Marcus caught them both, one in each arm, lifting them off the ground with a grunt that was only partially for show. "What have your parents been feeding you? You weigh a ton." "Pizza," Sophie declared proudly. "And ice cream," Michael added. "Well, that explains it." Lily appeared behind her children, her smile unchanged from the one she had given him all those years ago when she'd wrapped her tiny fingers around his pinky. "Hi, Marcus." "Hi yourself." He set the twins down and opened his arms for her. She stepped into his embrace, and for a moment she was 7 years old again, climbing into his chair in the middle of the night to comfort him after a nightmare. "How's the pain?" she asked quietly, the doctor in her never fully off duty. "Manageable. The new medication is helping." She pulled back to look at him, assessing. "You're not just saying that?" "Would I lie to you?" "You tried to once, about 5 years ago. I saw right through it." Marcus chuckled. "You always do." James came up the porch steps, carrying bags and managing to corral the twins at the same time. He was a good man, steady and kind, the kind of father Marcus had always imagined he might be if life had taken a different path. "Good to see you, sir." "James, how many times do I have to tell you to drop the sir?" At least once more, apparently. They shook hands, the grip firm and warm. James had earned his respect over the years, not through grand gestures, but through consistent presence. He showed up. That mattered more than anything else. The house filled with noise and chaos, the twins exploring every corner as if they hadn't been here a dozen times before. Sarah arrived an hour later, still spry at 75, her hair silver now, but her eyes just as sharp as they'd always been. "You're looking well," she said to Marcus as she settled into her favorite chair on the porch. "Better than the last time." "I've been working at it." "Good. That's all any of us can do." Dinner was a loud affair, the table groaning under the weight of food, conversation flowing freely between courses. Marcus looked around at the faces gathered there, at the family he had somehow, against all odds, been given. It was so different from those first years in Millbrook, when silence had been his only companion, and human connection had felt like a foreign language he had forgotten how to speak. After dinner, when the twins had been put to bed, and the adults were gathered on the porch with glasses of wine, Lily leaned over and took his hand. "I have something to tell you." Marcus looked at her, saw the nervousness in her eyes, the same look she'd had when she was small, and had something important to say. "What is it?" She glanced at James, who nodded encouragingly. "I've been invited to give a keynote speech at the National Veterans Mental Health Conference next month. It's a big deal. Thousands of people, live-streamed around the world." "Lily, that's wonderful. Why do you look so worried?" She took a deep breath. "Because I want to tell our story, yours and mine, about how a little girl crashed into a broken man's life and how they helped each other heal. About how connection can save lives, even when everything seems hopeless." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. Their story. He had shared pieces of it over the years, at group meetings and mentorship sessions, but never publicly, never to thousands of people. "I know it's a lot to ask," Lily continued, her voice rushed, "and I would never do it without your permission. If you say no, I'll find something else to talk about. But I think our story could help people. I think it could show them that they're not alone." Marcus looked at her, at this remarkable woman who had once been a fearless child with a pinky promise, and felt tears prick at his eyes. "You've already written it, haven't you?" She blushed. "Maybe a draft or two." "Can I read it?" She pulled out her phone and handed it to him. "It's all there. Every word." Marcus read slowly, scrolling through the document, seeing his own life reflected back at him through her words. The darkness and the light, the struggle and the triumph, the little moments that had seemed insignificant at the time but had turned out to be everything. When he finished, he handed the phone back to her. "It's beautiful. So I can use it." He took her hand again, holding it the way she had held his that first night in the cabin. "You can use it, on one condition. Anything. I want to be there, in the audience. I want to hear you tell our story to the world." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "You'd do that? For you?" "I'd do anything." She threw her arms around him, and for a moment they were back in that rainy cabin, a broken man and a fearless child, finding their way to each other through the darkness. The conference was held in a massive convention center in Washington, D.C., the auditorium packed with thousands of mental health professionals, veterans, family members, and advocates. Marcus sat in the front row, flanked by Sarah, James, and a contingent of friends from Millbrook, who had made the trip to show their support. Mike was there, older now, but still solid. Danny, who had become a counselor himself, sat beside him. Helen Patterson had passed away a few years back, but her daughter had come in her stead, representing the town that had given Marcus a second chance. When Lily took the stage, she looked nervous for just a moment. Then her eyes found Marcus in the front row, and something settled in her expression. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Dr. Lily Mitchell Barnes, and I'm here to tell you a story. It's a story about fear and courage, about isolation and connection, about the darkest night of a man's soul and the unexpected light that guided him home." She paused, gathering herself. 20 years ago, my mother's car skidded off a road in rural Oregon during a terrible storm. I was 7 years old. I hit my head on the dashboard and lost consciousness. My mother, desperate and afraid, carried me through the rain to the only shelter she could find, a cabin at the edge of the forest. Inside that cabin lived a man named Marcus Cole. He was a former Navy SEAL, a 15-year veteran of special operations, a warrior who had served his country in places most of us will never know about. He was also broken, destroyed by the things he had seen and done. He had retreated from the world, convinced that he was beyond saving, beyond redemption, beyond hope. Everyone in that small town was afraid of him. They crossed the street when they saw him coming. They whispered about the dangerous stranger with the scarred face and the haunted eyes. They gave him a wide berth, and he let them, because he believed he deserved their fear. He believed he was a monster. But I wasn't afraid. Lily's voice cracked slightly, and she took a moment to compose herself. I wasn't afraid because children often see what adults miss. I looked at Marcus and I didn't see a monster. I saw a man who was hurting, a man who needed someone to see past the scars to the wounded soul underneath. So when he woke up, screaming from a nightmare that first night, I climbed into his chair and held his hand. When he told me he had forgotten how to be happy, I made him promise to practice, the way I practiced riding my bike. When we left his cabin the next morning, I hugged him and made him pinky promise that he wouldn't give up. And he didn't. She turned to look directly at Marcus, tears streaming down her face. He didn't give up. He went to group therapy. He reached out to other veterans. He let people into his life, slowly at first, then more openly. He became a mentor, a friend, a pillar of his community. He built a family out of strangers who became loved ones. And he kept his pinky promise. He practiced being happy until happiness became something he actually felt. I'm not telling this story to suggest that healing is easy. It's not. Marcus would be the first to tell you that there were setbacks, relapses, nights when the darkness felt overwhelming. He would tell you that the ghosts never fully leave, that you learn to live with them rather than making them disappear. But I am telling this story to say that healing is possible, that no matter how broken you feel, no matter how far gone you think you are, there is always a way back. It might come from an unexpected place. It might come in a form you never anticipated. For Marcus, it came in the form of a 7-year-old girl with a head wound and an unfounded faith in his ability to be good. Connection saves lives. Human contact, human compassion, the simple act of seeing another person and refusing to look away. That's what we do in this field. That's why we're here. Not to fix people, because people aren't machines that can be repaired, but to walk beside them on the journey, to hold their hand in the darkness, to remind them that they're not alone. 20 years ago, I made a pinky promise to a broken man. Today, I stand before you because he kept it. Because he showed me that the bravest thing any of us can do is ask for help. Because he taught me that healing isn't about becoming who you were before. It's about becoming who you're meant to be. If you're struggling today, if you feel like there's no way out of the darkness, I want you to know something. You matter. Your pain is real, but so is the possibility of healing. Reach out, let someone in. It won't be easy and it won't be quick, but it will be worth it. And if you're here as a provider, as a helper, as someone who walks beside the wounded, I want you to know something too. Never underestimate the power of your presence. Never doubt that a single moment of genuine connection can change a life. You may never know all the lives you've touched, all the suicides you've prevented, all the futures you've made possible. But trust that they're there. Trust that your work matters. Trust that somewhere out there, a broken person is taking their first steps back toward the light because you refused to give up on them. She paused, wiping her eyes. Marcus Cole was supposed to die alone in a cabin in the woods, convinced that he was beyond saving. Instead, he became my hero, my mentor, and the best grandfather my children could ever ask for. He saved my life that night in the cabin, treating my injuries, keeping me safe until morning. And I like to think I saved his too, just by not being afraid. That's our story, That's the power of connection. That's why we're here." The auditorium erupted in applause. People were on their feet, tears streaming down faces all around the room. Marcus sat in his chair, unable to move, overwhelmed by the force of emotion crashing through him. Then Lily was there, stepping off the stage and walking toward him, arms outstretched. He stood up and caught her, holding her tight, the way he had held her when she was small, the way he would hold her until his last breath. "Thank you," she whispered, "for keeping your promise." "Thank you," he whispered back, "for making me keep it." They stood there, grandfather and granddaughter by every measure that mattered, surrounded by thousands of strangers who were no longer strangers, bound together by the shared understanding that healing was possible, that hope was real, that no one was ever truly beyond saving. The conference ended, but the ripples continued. Lily's speech went viral, viewed millions of times around the world. Messages poured in from veterans and their families, from mental health professionals and ordinary people, all of them touched by the story of the broken seal and the fearless little girl. Marcus received letters from people he would never meet, people who told him that his story had given them courage to seek help, to reach out, to try again. He read everyone, answering as many as he could, adding his voice to the chorus of hope that had somehow grown from his pain. And life went on, the way it always does. Seasons changed, years passed, the twins grew older and new babies were born, the family expanding with each passing year. Marcus watched it all from his porch in Millbrook, surrounded by the people he loved, grateful for every moment. On the night before his 75th birthday, Lily called him on video chat. Behind her, he could see her children, now teenagers, and her husband, and Sarah, still going strong at 82. "Happy early birthday, Grandpa Bear." "Thank you, sweetheart. We have a surprise for you tomorrow. The whole gang is coming to Millbrook." "You're kidding." "Nope. Sophie and Michael insisted. They want to throw you the biggest party you've ever had." Marcus felt his eyes sting. That's really something." "You're really something." Lily leaned closer to the camera. "You know that, right? You've touched so many lives, made such a difference. And it all started because you opened your door to a stranger on a rainy night." "It started," Marcus corrected gently, "because a little girl wasn't afraid." Lily smiled, the same bright smile that had broken through his defenses all those years ago. "I love you, Marcus. I love you too, Lily. I love you too." The call ended, and Marcus sat on his porch in the gathering dusk, looking out at the forest that had sheltered him through so many seasons. The ghosts were quiet now, at peace with the past, content to rest in the shadows of memory. He thought about everything he had been through, everything he had survived, the war, the trauma, the years of isolation and despair, and then the unexpected gift of a rainy night, a scared mother, and a child who saw him for who he really was. Everyone had been afraid of the war-broken ex-Navy SEAL. Everyone except one little girl who did the unthinkable. She believed in him. And that had made all the difference. As the stars emerged overhead, Marcus closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The air smelled of pine and flowers, of home and belonging. His heart, that battered, scarred organ that had carried him through so much darkness, beat steadily in his chest. He was alive, he was loved, he was home. And tomorrow he would celebrate another year of this improbable, beautiful life, surrounded by the family that had saved him. It was more than he had ever dared to hope for. It was everything.